faith that stays there comes a point in waiting where something shifts quietly inside the soul. Not relief, not answers, just a stillness that wasn't there before. This is not the moment when the problem disappears. It is the moment when faith decides to remain, even without reassurance. This kind of faith is not built in victory. It is formed when disappointment has already taken its toll, when enthusiasm has faded, when prayers have become fewer, not because belief is gone, but because words have been exhausted. Faith that stays is not dramatic, it is steady. It breathes slowly. It endures. Many people walk away from faith not because they stopped believing in God, but because they grew tired of waiting for him. Waiting can feel like standing in an empty room, calling a name that does not answer back. And yet this is often where God does his deepest work, not in what changes around you, but in what changes within you. Jesus understood this kind of faith intimately. He watched it form in the lives of those who followed him. Not all of them saw immediate miracles. Not all of them received what they hoped for in the way they expected. Yet some stayed. They stayed through confusion. They stayed through fear. They stayed through silence. Staying requires courage. It is easier to leave than to remain in uncertainty. It is easier to harden the heart than to keep it open while waiting. Faith that stays chooses vulnerability over bitterness. It chooses trust over understanding. There were moments when even the disciples struggled with this. They left everything to follow Jesus, yet they did not always understand his ways. They expected triumph and instead witnessed rejection. They expected clarity and encountered mystery. Still, they stayed. Not because they had all the answers, but because they had come to know his heart. Faith that stays learns to separate God's character from circumstances. It stops measuring love by outcomes and starts recognizing it in presence. It understands that God can be near even when the situation remains unchanged. In the waiting, faith becomes quieter but stronger. Louder faith often seeks proof. Staying faith learns contentment without it. It does not deny pain, it acknowledges it fully, but it refuses to let pain have the final word. There is a sacred kind of strength in continuing to pray when answers delay, in opening scripture when emotions feel numb, in whispering gratitude when nothing seems resolved. These small acts are not insignificant. They are evidence of a faith that refuses to disappear. God honors faith that stays, not because it is perfect, but because it is sincere. He sees the effort it takes to keep trusting when hope feels fragile. He notices the days you show up, even when you feel empty. He is not distant from your endurance. He is present in it. Waiting often reveals what we are clinging to. Sometimes God allows delays not to withhold good, but to loosen our grip on expectations that cannot sustain us. Faith that stays learns to hold promises gently, trusting that God's fulfillment may look different, but will never be careless. This kind of faith does not rush God, it learns to walk with him. It stops asking only when and starts asking who God is in the waiting, who you are becoming through it, who you will be when the season changes. Faith that stays is patient, not because it is strong on its own, but because it leans on grace. It understands that waiting is not a sign of rejection, but often a sign of preparation. Something is being aligned, something is being shaped. Even when you do not feel faithful, your decision to remain matters. Staying is an act of worship. Trusting without clarity is an offering. Endurance itself becomes prayer. There will be days when staying feels heavy, when you question why you are still holding on. In those moments, remember this. Faith does not need to feel powerful to be powerful. It only needs to stay. And God, who sees in secret, walks with those who stay. Faith when you're tired of waiting, There are seasons when faith feels effortless, when hope rises easily with the morning light. And then there are seasons like this one. Seasons where waiting stretches longer than expected, prayers echo back in silence, and the heart grows heavy from carrying unanswered questions. This is a story for that season. It begins in the quiet place where disappointment often settles. Not with a loud cry, but with a sigh. The kind you release when you've done everything you know to do and still nothing has changed. You believed, you prayed, you trusted, yet the door remains closed. The healing hasn't come. The promise feels distant. And slowly, without realizing it, waiting begins to feel like punishment. Faith in this place is different. It is not bold or loud. It does not stand tall with certainty. It sits, it listens, it trembles. It wonders if God is still near. There were many who felt this way in the days of Jesus. People who had waited so long that hope felt fragile in their hands. A man by the pool, surrounded by healing waters he could never reach. A woman who had suffered quietly for years, growing weaker with every step. Parents who watched sickness steal the strength from their children while heaven seemed still. None of them expected miracles anymore. They were tired of waiting. Waiting has a way of reshaping us. At first, it sharpens our prayers, then it tests our patience, and eventually it exposes what we believe about God when He does not move on our timetable. We begin to ask questions we never thought we would ask. Does He see me? Does He care? Did I hear Him wrong? This is where faith becomes most honest. Jesus often arrived in moments like these, not when hope was strong, but when it was nearly gone. He stepped into spaces filled with disappointment, not to shame those who doubted, but to meet them exactly where they were. He did not rush their pain. He did not dismiss their waiting. He stood with them in it. There is something sacred about delayed answers. They strip faith down to its core. They remove the applause, the certainty, the visible progress. What remains is a quiet decision to trust God's heart, even when His hands seem still. For many, waiting feels like abandonment. But in the presence of Jesus, waiting became an invitation. An invitation to see God not only as the one who acts, but as the one who stays. The woman who reached for the hem of His garment did not have strength for another long prayer. She did not ask for attention or explanation. She simply reached. Her faith was exhausted, but it was still alive. And that was enough. The father who begged for his child's healing had already endured disappointment. Others had failed him. Time had worked against him. Yet he brought what little belief he had left and offered it honestly. Jesus did not require perfect faith. He met imperfect faith with perfect compassion. Waiting does not disqualify you from miracles. Weariness does not cancel God's promises. Silence does not mean absence. Often, the deepest work God does happens while nothing seems to be happening at all. In the waiting, faith matures. It becomes less about outcomes and more about relationship. Less about control and more about surrender. Less about proving God and more about knowing Him. Jesus never hurried miracles to impress crowds. He moved with intention, with tenderness, with divine timing that did not always make sense to those watching. Even when He delayed, love was never delayed. Even when He waited, purpose was unfolding. There are moments when Jesus arrives after hope appears buried, when tears have already been shed, when disappointment feels final. And yet these are often the moments when His glory is revealed most clearly. Not because the pain was small, but because His power was greater. Faith, when you are tired of waiting, is not loud. It is a whisper that says, I will stay. I do not understand, but I will stay. It is choosing to believe that God's silence is not rejection, that His timing is not cruelty, that His love is not measured by speed. If you are tired today, you are not weak. You are human. If your prayers feel heavy, God is not offended. He is near. If your faith feels thin, it is still faith. Waiting does not mean God has forgotten you. It often means He is working in ways you cannot yet see. Preparing hearts, aligning moments, writing a story that will one day make sense in the light of His faithfulness. Jesus is not afraid of your questions. He is not disappointed by your weariness. He walks with you through the waiting, carrying hope when you can no longer hold it yourself. And one day, often quietly, hope arrives. Not always the way you imagined, not always when you expected, but always with purpose, always with love. Until that day, your waiting is not wasted. Your tears are not unseen. Your faith, even when tired, is precious. If this story blesses you, kindly like, share, and subscribe.